Hey everybody, welcome to Diversity. Let's be diverse. I need a theme song. Let's be diverse. How's it going, everybody? Hope everybody's doing well. I'm recording this on Sunday, and it's a nice day, and I'm going to mow the lawn, which seems like a very normal thing to do. Today's lecture is brought to you by Wordstock, which I think it still happens, is a annual convention of authors and book lovers in Portland, Wordstock. I used to go to it a whole bunch when I had two novels out, The Dream Police and Mission of the Sacred Heart, which you should buy if you want to pass this class. Available on Amazon. Okay, today we're talking about paradigms. Those of you that have had my classes know that it's good to kind of start with the way we orient our thoughts about things in the world of sociology. So often there's a discussion at the very beginning or early on about paradigms. Paradigms are worldviews. So for those of you who don't know or need a little refresher, we'll do a little refresher, and especially applying this to the topic of diversity. Paradigms are worldviews, the way we sort of organize our thoughts about the world. So as we kind of talked about last time, we could think of the sociological paradigm as a worldview, that we are the products of our environment, that we are socialized to believe what we believe. That's kind of a broad paradigm. But within sociology, there are sort of three dominant paradigms that we're going to focus on. And we're going to bring in other paradigms, especially the feminist paradigm, and talking about some of these issues. But we want to kind of start with the sort of three main ways that sociologists organize their thoughts and how they would relate to the topic of diversity. That's what we're going to do. We'll see how quickly we can do this so I can go mow the lawn before it starts hailing or raining frogs or whatever is going to happen in this next stage of the apocalypse. And so we talk about these three paradigms. And so some of you might remember the conflict paradigm, the symbolic interactionist paradigm, and the functionalist paradigm. And so the starting, we'll redefine them for people that have forgotten, aren't familiar with them. But the kind of general feeling that you get when you're looking at things from a sociological perspective under a particular one of those three paradigms is that they are sort of inherently political. That functionalist feels a little conservative. That conflict feels a little radical. I mean, we associate the conflict paradigm with Karl Marx, right? So the father of communism. And functionalism is associated with Emile Durkheim, who had this thought that the French Revolution caused a lot of problems. Maybe they should have taken it a little bit slower instead of chopping off the king's head and going all crazy. And, you want a slow evolution of things. So there is this kind of political dichotomy built into it. But it's important to point out you can have a conflict view about something that's a conservative position. Like you could be a conflict theorist and be against abortion, for example, because you're looking at the powerlessness of the unborn and you want to defend the unborn, just like Karl Marx wanted to defend the workers. And then the other thing is, where does symbolic interactionism fit in that right-left paradigm? So one of the things we sort of try to do when we take these paradigms to the next level is disentangle them from politics a little bit. It's not always easy to do. But so that's what we're going to do. So we're going to talk about these three paradigms, these three sociological paradigms, and how they help us to understand the role of diversity. And so there's actually probably more questions than answers that come up when we're talking about these perspectives. But one of the things I will expect you to say when we're looking at the issue of disability, or we're looking at the issue of sexuality, what would functionalists say? What might a conflict theorist say? That little bit. Okay, but we're going to start, usually I start kind of with functionalists because it's chronological, but I really want to start with symbolic interactionism, especially since I meant to bring it with me, our textbook kind of comes from a symbolic interactionist orientation about things. So here we go. So symbolic interactionism, the notion of symbolic interaction is what we call a micro-level paradigm. It's really focused on the individual person and the things that interact with them. What we would talk about, as was mentioned last class, is our socialization agents, how family and peers and the media and religion and education all sort of write these things on our blank slate, tabula rasa, right, the blank slate, and that we kind of develop a shared understanding of how the world works by all this stuff being written on us from the point that we're born. So, for example, in my 204 class, we spend a lot of time talking about religion, how we come to understand what God looks like. We aren't born knowing that, because in some cultures, there's multiple gods. In some cultures, God is female. In some cultures, God is the source. In some cultures, God is a manifestation of the source. So it depends on kind of where you grow up, how you think of that. But it feels very, very real. I was watching some church somewhere in America who is not quarantining and is not socially isolating. They're all get together and hugging and praising Jesus. And the reporter was interviewing these people, and they said, "Aren't you worried about spreading the virus, or aren't you worried about contracting the virus?" And they said, "We got the blood of Jesus. We got the blood of Jesus. We don't have anything to worry about. The blood of Jesus will protect us." And then the next question was, "Aren't you worried about spreading it?" And they said, "Well, what about them spreading it to us?" And I thought, but aren't you protected by the blood of Jesus? But, to them, that is very real. They were socialized in that environment. So one of the terms that we use here, which is going to relate to this discussion of diversity, is the social construction of reality. How we construct a reality that is very, very clear to us, very real, very, feels very inborn. So an example of this, one of the questions we ask from a symbolic interactionist perspective about diversity is, how do we construct the meaning of difference? How do we construct the meaning of difference? For example, is race an absolute biological category, or is it something that we create and then live by it? I was just looking at the 2020 census. Hopefully you filled yours out, or if you haven't yet, something to do while you're locked down. And I am, when you're talking about things from a symbolic interactionist perspective, you have to do this a lot, these air quotes, because it means you know what we mean, but there's some other meaning behind it. So I define as white, and I was looking, on the 2020 census, and here's, under the 2020 census, here's the definition of white. I'm going to read straight from the census. The category of white, and it even puts it in quotation marks with a capital W because it's a proper noun. The category of white includes all individuals who identify with one or more nationalities or ethnic groups originating in Europe, the Middle East, or North Africa. Examples of these groups include, but are not limited to, German, Irish, English, Italian, Lebanese, Egyptian, Polish, French, Iranian, Slavic, Cajun, and Chaldean, which I had to look up Chaldean. I didn't know what that is, and it's apparently people from what is kind of now modern Iraq that were Mesopotamians, and apparently there's a lot of Chaldeans in Michigan, according to my Facebook friends. A lot of those people, I don't know if I were to interview a white supremacist and talk to them about somebody from Egypt and say, "Hey, here's the picture of the president of Egypt. They are legally white." They would probably say, "No, that's not how I construct whiteness. The Irish were not considered to be white for a very long time." So it's a process by which these things are constructed, and we become used to using them. We sort of internalize them. There's that term. And so I would ask my white supremacist subjects how they feel about this particular construction of whiteness that's given to us by the 2020 census. I had a friend, I brought this issue up on my Facebook page because I thought it was so funny how this is defined as whiteness. And I had a friend who said his grandparents came from Syria and moved to Alabama, and they couldn't figure out what racial category to put these Syrian immigrants in. And they thought, well, since they're from the Holy Land, like Syria is sort of, in the neighborhood of the Holy Land, they must be white, since they didn't know where to put them. And so this is about this construction, how we construct these meanings of difference. And there's a great example in your textbook that I've heard before about baseball umpires. And if you know baseball, I'm wearing my soccer jersey today because I can't wait for soccer to come back. Football, this is from the Michoacan Monarcas, the home team in Mexico. In baseball, if you know, the umpire sits behind or stands behind, really squats behind the batter and the catcher, and has to figure out which balls that come in are strikes and which ones are balls. Are they in the zone or outside the zone? And it talks about this sort of little anecdote talks about three different umpires who kind of describe their job in three very different ways that gets at the symbolic interactionist perspective. The first one says, when those pitches come in, I call them as I see them, meaning there are balls that are strikes and balls that aren't strikes. There is an absolute definition. There's a right or wrong. There's you're either in or you're out of the box. This is what we would call an essentialist. An essentialist believes in sort of absolute truths. Then the second umpire says, I call them as I see them. This introduces a little bit of subjectivity into it. That, one umpire may have a strike zone that's smaller than another umpire. And so it's really a little bit up to the individual how they deal with that absolute box. And then the third umpire says, they ain't nothing until I call them. Meaning that concept of ball and strike doesn't exist until I say it's a ball or strike. Otherwise, it's just a ball being thrown down, between two people. And that is a constructionist. That is somebody who is knows that they are constructing reality. And I think that little umpire metaphor, I guess, is sort of useful for how we think, is the world an absolute truth, or is it sort of relative, or are we actually constructing what the meaning is? And the constructing what the meaning is the symbolic interactionist perspective. So a great example of this is homosexuality. Say it, Randy. I no whiskey yet. It's too early in the day. That is a social construction. It is after 11 a.m. somewhere in the world. Really? Why? Hold on a second. Oh, much better. So we construct these meanings. Anyway, the example about homosexuality, that's what I was trying to say. That's why I needed a little something in my coffee. Is a really good example of sort of the essentialist view versus the constructionist view. The essentialist would think that homosexuality is an inborn characteristic. You either are or you aren't. It's sort of this binary. You're either gay or straight, right? And that is locked in, and maybe locked in from birth. A constructionist would say the sexuality is fluid, and straight people can have gay experiences, and gay people can have straight experiences, and there's a lot of bisexual people in there that we want to just sort of force into one category or another. I mean, how many people think that bisexual people are just homosexuals who haven't made up their mind or haven't committed to the right team? It's just, that is a constructionist view. And the reality in America is we're kind of split on those two views, including within the gay community, about whether it's sort of an inborn absolute characteristic or whether it's more fluid. That was an example I was trying to make. And I think we construct these from this perspective. We construct these categories of difference, and then we assume that they're real. So like disability. We assume that disability is real. Instead of thinking that there are just lots of different abilities in the world, we construct this notion of able-bodied and disabled as sort of these two different things. And I think a place where we really see this is in the DSM. The DSM is the official diagnostic manual of the American Psychological Association, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. That's the name of it, the DSM. And the DSM gets updated every few years. The very first DSM was in 1952, DSM-1, and that included homosexuality, among other things, as a form of mental illness. That gets dropped in DSM-2, which comes out in 1968, DSM-3 in 1980, DSM-4 in 1994, and DSM-5, the current diagnostic manual, comes out in 2013 and deletes a lot of subcategories for schizophrenia and autism that are suddenly no longer considered to be disabilities. So there is this construction of these categories of difference. And the construction, and so here's some of the elements of this construction. We're going to spend a little bit more time on this paradigm just because I think it pulls from both of the other paradigms and really helps us in what we're going to be talking about in this class, especially around the issue of white fragility. First of all, this construction process, this construction of difference allows for a binary to emerge, for what we would call dichotomizing, sort of us versus them. There are categories that people belong to and categories that they don't belong to. I mean, think about this question. There are a lot of people, and this may be some of you in the class, who have, especially if you're biracial or multiracial, people will ask, what are you? What are you? Hey, I've been guilty, before I kind of started thinking about this a lot more, of saying to someone whose ethnic or racial identity I wasn't sure of, what are you? Because we want to be able to fit them into the box. And the box basically says, are you in my box, or are you in another box? Are you, in this case, white like me, able-bodied like me, heterosexual, whatever my box has been defined as, or are you different from me? So we allow this sort of dichotomizing. So just think about how we think about white. I mean, we're focusing a little bit on race here. White and non-white people, or straight and not straight people. There's sort of this dichotomy we've constructed. So the first thing that this construction process allows us to create sort of a binary. You're either in this category or you're not. You're either in my category or you're not. So that dichotomizing is constructing difference. We are constructing difference. Why are you different from me? This construction process also allows us to do aggregation. We are aggregating people. We are creating large categories of people. To talk about the mentally disabled category, which is such a social construction, I think includes pretty much every human being on the earth is mentally disabled. I mean, who isn't mentally disabled at the moment, right? We are going a little crazy. And we'll talk about that term crazy also and how that can be problematic. One of my favorite examples of aggregating people is the term Asian. Asians. Like, Asians are sort of one monolithic, and this is an important word we're going to use, monolithic category. More on that in a second. That all have similar experiences, similar ways of looking at the world, similar cuisines, similar religious views, similar ideas about relationships. And of course, the Asian category is billions of people from lots of different places. And I'll go back to the 2020 census, because I thought, God, the 2020 census is really sort of an interesting place where all this comes together. So here's who Asians are in the 2020 census. The category Asian includes all individuals who identify with one or more nationalities or ethnic groups originating from the Far East. And of course, that's a relative term, Far East. Far East, like, I think of the Far East as Gresham. To me, that's too far to go. Oh man, Pendleton, that's the super Far East. But it's all relative to where you are, where you're standing. Anyway, originating from the Far East, Southeast Asia, or the Indian subcontinent. Examples of these groups include, but are not included to, Chinese, Filipino, Asian, Indian, Vietnamese, Korean, Japanese. The category also includes groups such as Pakistani, Cambodian, Hmong, Thai, Bengali, and Min, which is another group of people I need to learn more about. As if by putting all these people in a category, they share common characteristics. So that's also something that comes out of this construction process, which is throwing a whole bunch of people together in a category. They're all people with disabilities, or all people who are not heterosexual, or all people who are female. All women, women, all women are the same. Like, that type of aggregating behavior puts a whole bunch of different people in a category and gives them similar characteristics and creates this sort of notion of the monolith. So if you know the monolith, if anybody's ever seen 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is not a movie about back in time, it was a 1968 movie about the future. And in their view of the future, by 2001, we were already making it to Jupiter. That didn't turn out so well. But anyway, they keep finding, throughout the history of the universe, there keeps appearing this sort of monolith that appears as a sort of a changing point. But a monolith sort of means like a unifying, dominant image of things. So when we say that there's a monolithic view of people from India, or there's a monolithic view of people with autism, or there's a monolithic view of women, it's the idea that they've been plopped into this category. They've been aggregated together into this category. And then so we've constructed the monolith, that we make the monolith. Okay. what happens from this, then, this idea of dichotomizing and aggregating, is we create the other. And this is a term we use a lot in talking about deviance, this notion of otherizing, that we construct difference from the norm. That there's the norm group, maybe it's the group that there's the most of, but an interesting, we talk about majority and minority. There's more women in this country than men. We should, if we want to be statistically accurate, we should talk about men as the minority, because men die a lot faster. They shoot each other and they don't go to the doctor when they've got the coronavirus. It'll be fine. I'll just have a little whiskey and it'll be fine. So, women live on average 7 years longer in the United States than men. So men are the statistical minority, but we still talk about them as the sort of dominant majority category. Anyway, otherizing constructs the difference from the norm. These are the norm people. So we talk a lot about the notion of WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, as being the norm. Oh my God, my fingers are going to get sore from doing this. And people who are not WASPs are therefore the other, right? Men are the norm in a patriarchal society. Women are the other. If straight people are the norm in a heterosexist society, gay, queer people are the other. And so we do this a lot. If people who are born here are the norm, immigrants are the other. So otherize allows us to construct difference from the norms. And allows for a couple things. It allows those people who are the other to be sanctioned somehow, to be somehow discriminated against because they are different. There's something, there's something, pathological isn't really the right word, but there's something sort of with them that makes them not like us. There's something innate in their character. They have an innate characteristic. Maybe that's the word I'm looking for. And then therefore they become stigmatized because they are different. And so the question here is, from this social constructionist view, symbolic interactionist, what is the cumulative effect of being otherized your whole life? I had an interesting conversation with my wife, who is from Mexico, we had a really intense conversation about her living in this neighborhood in Northeast Portland, which, even though it's the most diverse part of Portland, we live in a pretty white block. Like our neighborhood, the people of color, there's still some people of color left. We have some good African-American neighbors still in the neighborhood, but pretty much it's all white people. And the experience for her to be a Latina in a white neighborhood and feeling like she's on the outside. They don't share her culture. They don't share her language. They don't share her religious traditions. They don't share. And then when we go to Mexico, when we go to Morelia and she's back home, all that disappears. She's around people that are like her. And I'm the other one. There was a time when we were riding a combi, which are these little buses that you ride to get around town. And all these kids were just staring at me because they never actually saw a white person speaking English. And I was like, wow, this must be how it feels for her back in Portland. So what is the cumulative effect of being otherized? So the symbolic interactionist perspective does have an opportunity for us to think about this issue of trauma. I mentioned trauma is going to be kind of a theme. What is it to be socially defined as the out of a member of the out group? Even though you're just an individual, you're just a person, you have been put in this category and deemed as different from the norm. Okay, so just to summarize, we'll get to these other two paradigms. Symbolic interactionists see how difference, and I'll put this up on the screen. Symbolic interactionists see how differences are created, and we learn a shared understanding of their meanings. They aren't real, but we believe that they are, and we adjust our behavior to that shared understanding. So this is just like the flat earth people, which apparently for some stupid reason are back. When people saw the world as flat, right, their behavior adapted to that definition. Their social construction was the world was like that, and then it fell off the end, and then their behavior. I really don't get this whole new flat earth thing. Is it just sort of celebrating being different? If somebody can explain to me why flat earthers are back, they think the earth is a disc? Like, I don't get it. I'm an empiricist. I want to see it. Anyway, so symbolic interactionists, we construct the difference. Okay. We'll come back to all these.